So John 10, 1 through to 15 or so, even easier. You can find it on your phone, follow along, and if you want to do that, I'm reading from the New International Version. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again that very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees a wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand. He cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So, let me ask you a question. You can answer this if you want. You don't have to. How many of you are on social media? Social media of some form or another. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Hey, listen. Okay. The majority of people, their hands are going up. Okay. According to Instagram, I'm not going to ask you how many followers you have. I'm not going to ask you how many people you follow. Just don't worry about it. But listen, according to Instagram, apparently, I follow about 500 people, like more or less. Like that's the people who I've seen their accounts and I've said, sure, follow. I'll look at the stuff you post. Follow, about 500 people. How many of you like Twitter? Twitter sort of, yeah, Twitter's less so. Like, I wasn't sure about Twitter for a little while. I thought maybe it was dying, but I think it's made a little bit of a resurgence. So Twitter, same thing. You follow people. It's not photos more or less on Twitter. It's mostly text, right? Okay, how many of you are on Facebook? Okay, all right. I think like demographics-wise, we probably most likely have the most people on Facebook. How many of you are not on any social media platform at all? Congratulations. I think you win the game of life. Smart decision. I haven't figured out TikTok yet. I'd encourage you to not try. No, I mean, you can try if you want. I don't understand it, but listen, here's the thing. No matter how many people I follow on Instagram, no matter how many friends I choose to add on Facebook or like accept, I can guarantee you one thing, and tell me if this is true for you as well. I do not interact with every single one of them. Is that true for you? Yeah, okay, all right. Don't leave me out on my own up here. That's fine. Yeah, good. Okay. Here's the thing. I've been reflecting on this, and we've done this a couple times, and I think we've developed, at least for me, I'm going to speak personally, we developed an odd image of what it means to follow somebody in 2023, right? In the West, certainly in the West, in Canada, like, it confuses me. It confuses me because it's a word that I just don't know what it means anymore. And I don't say that in any like type of cynical, like, oh, I hate what's going on in the world type of way. And like, but like, I just don't get it. I don't understand because everybody uses the word differently. And surely, like, I don't interact with all of those people that I follow. And they don't interact with me. Like, I can guarantee you that. Not a chance. They're like, we don't have time for that guy. That's fine. But still, apparently, I follow them. I follow the news. Maybe you use the word that way. Different news outlets in different forms or different mechanisms of delivery, but, you know, like I follow the news sometimes. Sometimes I need to turn it off. My dog follows me. Again, sometimes. Sometimes when I want him to, sometimes when I don't want him to. Sometimes when I want him to follow me, he's gone up the stairs to find Connie because he likes her better. I try to influence him. It works to some degree, and it doesn't. But it's a word to follow somebody, for somebody to follow you, that I think just takes on all of these different meanings. And yet, they influence me. If I'm not careful, they influence who I follow, influences me too much. Right? Like the language, I think it drives our everyday life. It drives who we follow is who we become. Certainly shapes who we become. It's because you're spending time. You're spending energy, focused attention, watching what people do. And suddenly you start to realize, like, oh, hey, like I saw them do something, and you're like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing these things? And it's because, like, why am I feeling guilty about the lunches that I'm packing my kids? And like I didn't cut the sandwiches into the right shapes, and like I didn't write them a personalized note every single day, and like I didn't buy the right snacks. And because I'm watching people. If this is a whole thing, you can be a mom and a dad influencer. You can be a parent influencer on Instagram. That's a profession now. And all they do is make lunches. And they post videos of them. And they make me feel bad about the lunches that I make for my kids. Like, what happens? You spend time. It's focused attention. You pay attention. You learn. You study, like, what it is like to be that person, whether you want to be like that person or not. And we've talked about this. It's not surprising, right? You become like the people you spend the most time with. It's just natural. You become like those around you, and you see it. You begin to sound like your closest friends. You adopt the same language as them. You say the same things. You have inside jokes, and it just happens. You look like your spouse as you age. The more you age, I'm sorry, Connie. It just happens. Right? Here's one that scares me a little bit. If you surround yourself with people who are outside of your economic bracket, the way you spend your money starts to change, whether or not you are able to spend it in those ways. Because you see what happens. You see the vacations. You see the way others spend money. And then you naturally feel pulled in that direction. You go out for dinners. You go on vacations that maybe otherwise you wouldn't. It changes the way you perceive what is, quote, like normal. And so even your spending habits can change. Now, you can use that to your benefit or not, but you have to be intentional about it. To follow means to watch, to listen, to take in, and to act accordingly. It changes the way you act. To follow somebody literally means that you are taking steps in the direction, becoming more like the person you are following. And here's Jesus, who says, I am the good shepherd. My sheep know me. More to the point, he says, my sheep follow me. It's the first call that Jesus places on the disciples, right? So he just goes, dudes are fishing. They're like, hey, maybe we didn't pass the exams to become disciples. He says, follow me. Eugene Peterson, and we're going to kind of loop back to this, he says, the call that Jesus places on your life, he simply says this, hey, come, get away with me, watch how I do it. Like, watch how I live my life. Learn the things of life that I do, that I live into, the things that I don't. Adopt the way of Jesus. And so I come to a passage like this and I say, listen, like, what does it mean? What does it mean that Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd? Or what does it mean for Jesus to name himself as the Good Shepherd? And what does it mean for you and me? Because essentially what Jesus says is, hey, you're sheep. That's the implication here. Jesus is the shepherd, and the sheep know the shepherd's voice, and the sheep follow him. And Jesus says to you, follow me. I think that makes me a sheep. I think it makes you a sheep. It's interesting to me that shepherding took on such a prominent role in the life of the people of God, because it is, like all throughout Scripture, this image of shepherding, this theme of shepherding recurs over and over again. Shepherd wasn't exactly the top of the list of people's aspirations of like, what do you want to become? It's like, what do you want to become? A shepherd? No! Like, that's not the way people thought. Shepherding also, or usually fell to the youngest in the family. So they're like, okay, while you're the youngest, you can't do all of these other more important things. You're going to be a shepherd. You're going to go take care of the sheep. Like, that's kind of the way they thought about it. We see this in the life of David. David was a shepherd. We go, hey, that's amazing. David was a shepherd, and he became king. Right? He became king of Israel. Amazing call of God. But listen, like, have you read the call of David recently? So dude's the youngest. He doesn't even get invited to the table. Like, it's like, they're looking for a king. You know who we're not going to call? We're not going to call the shepherd. He's out busy. He's doing work. He's like, we're not going to bring him back in. So he's the youngest. He's not even invited. Then when he is invited, it's like insult to injury because he's the youngest. He's like the shortest. He's the smallest. He's not the most good looking. Like, it's just like, one after the other. Like, dude doesn't have a lot going for him. Except that what God says mattered is that he had a heart that was following after God's own heart. He had a heart that wanted to become like God. It feels also important to mention that David was not perfect, far from it, and at times, like, the dude's actions were downright sinful and evil, like driven by sin, okay? Nonetheless, man after God's own heart, following after the heart of God. Shepherds in Israel were even commonly known to be the youngest women in the family, which maybe changes your image of what you think of as shepherd, because they weren't allowed to perform other roles in society. And so you go, okay, what can you do? You can tend the sheep. You can look after the flock. You can take care of them. That's now your role. And so when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, he's not claiming to be some like magnificent leader. It's not like he's saying, hey, that leader, that person that you've aspired to be for your entire life, I'm the best version of them. That's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is claiming to be one who serves, one who provides for his sheep, one who takes care of, one who tends to his sheep. I am the good shepherd. The most helpful imagery that I find around shepherding in the Bible actually comes out of a psalm that David himself wrote, Psalm 23, right? So David writes Psalm 23. Dude knew what it was like to be a shepherd. And he says, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. And maybe you've heard that typically at funerals. But I think there's something in it for us. Because we need to look, if Jesus says, listen, I'm the good shepherd. If you are sheep, if I'm a sheep, then we got to learn from the sheep. We got to learn, what do the sheep need? Why does naming Jesus as good shepherd mean so much? Number one, I think the sheep need to be led. Sheep have horrible senses of direction. Okay? They can follow a voice, but that's it. Moment of honesty here. How many of you have seen me point in the absolute, completely wrong direction? If I'm inside a building, I'm like, hey, you know where my house is this way? Like, is it this way? No, it's not, right? Like, which way is it? This way, yeah, like toward Hamilton. So a couple of you are chuckling here because this happens routinely. I know, you're like, yeah, down that way. You're always like this way. It's just hilarious. I think Blaine in one session meeting actually did this to me. It's that way. Horrible senses of direction, okay? But they know how to follow a voice. And now, I don't know how you picture shepherding. Maybe you picture it exactly like this. But I picture it a little bit like I see cattle herding. Like, you kind of round them up and you push them in a direction, right? And so whether you're using ATVs or horses or trucks or on your foot running around, I don't know why you do that. But what do? You surround the herd of cattle and you push them. And they run out before you, in front of you. That's not how shepherds lead flocks of sheep. The shepherd would go out ahead of the sheep, and he would call them. He would lead them from out front, and they would follow him because they knew his voice. And that's why the image is so important. That's why what Jesus says is so important, that you know Jesus' voice. Because you need to know the voice of the shepherd leading you. He's not going to come up behind you and like kick you in the right direction. He calls you forward. Sheep needed to be led, and we need to be and allow ourselves to be led by Jesus. And I think it's that allowing ourselves to be led that maybe we struggle with the most. Because it means following. It means submitting. It means learning to accept, okay, this is the direction. And maybe I want to push my life in this direction. Jesus says, no, come this way with me. I'm going to lead you to life. Sheep need to know the voice of the shepherd. They need to follow, because the shepherd is the one who would lead to life. The shepherd leads to green pastures. And so this is why, like in Psalm 23, the image is striking. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. Now, here's the thing about living in Ontario. It's pretty easy to picture lush green pastures and flowing streams of fresh water, right? Like, that's an easy thing to picture. You leave the city of Hamilton for like 20 minutes in any direction except toward the water, and you're going to find farmland. Maybe also except straight into Toronto. Like, don't drive the QEW. You're probably not going to find a farm there except for a rooftop farm. But you get the idea. Lush, big, open pastures. That's not what David is talking about. That's not what Jesus would have been picturing. It wasn't this like, I'm going to lead you out into a pasture and look at all the grass. Go, run wild, eat as much as you can. Green pasture, actually, when you get down to it, are little tufts of grass shooting up in an arid desert climate. Little patches of food. And so why was it important that the shepherd led his sheep? Because the shepherd was the one who knew where that life was. The shepherd was the one who knew where those tufts of grass were. And the sheep on their own, like, they're done for. They're not going to find the tufts of grass. They're going to get lost. There's a video that went around. It went pretty viral. And it was like, it was a shepherd. And I'm pretty sure it was a shepherd in the Middle East still. And so this sheep was stuck in a gully. And the shepherd just pulls the sheep out, like literally just kind of like muscles the sheep up back onto the plateau. And what does the sheep do? Takes 3 shots forward and jumps right back in to the gully. Gets stuck again. And listen, like, you and I, we need to be led to life. To call Jesus Good Shepherd is to say that Jesus is the one who we admit will lead to sources of life, who knows where those little tufts of grass are and the streams that run, where there's water that's safe to drink. Life in the midst of dry, desert, arid climate. Where do you feel those needs in your life? So I think it's powerful. Jesus says this. He says, the thief comes only to kill and steal and destroy, but I have come so that you would have life and have it to the full. I think in life, like, there's many different thieves. There's many different things that promise life. There's many different things that will try to lead you in the direction of a fulfilled, quote, fulfilled life. And some of them are good, but bad to extremes, and some of them are just straight bad. If you look at a few of the problems, you go, okay, workaholism, chasing a dream of more money and more vacations and fewer problems, more money, fewer problems. That's how it goes, right? Addictions, or the overuse of substance, right? Just even to name one. Like, by its nature, alcohol, by its nature, tells your brain, great, release dopamine, feel good, until it doesn't. I'm not saying like alcohol to any degree is bad. I'm saying, listen, like, the promises, why do we like some of these things? The promise is life. The promise is you're going to feel good. By its nature, right? It does these things and then it crashes. Interestingly, shopping also sends the same signals to your brain, okay? Yeah? All right? If you've ever been in a moment of life where you're like, why do I keep buying things? Like, look at how your emotional life is. Because it does. It releases dopamine and says, hey, you're going to feel better if you do this. And you do for a minute, you do for a moment, you do for a season, and then you open your Visa bill and it all comes falling down, right? I think these things, if you want to know what in your life is a thief, like I think simply ask, like, what leaves you feeling empty and alone at the end of the day? What thing like that you thought would give you what you wanted, that you thought would be fulfilling, you thought would fill a hole, that you thought would fill a need, actually at the end of the day leaves you feeling the most isolated and the most alone and the most dead? Those are the things Jesus says, hey, thief. It comes only to kill and only to steal and only to destroy. And I've come so that you may have life. Jesus is the one who leads to life. Jesus is the one who is the good shepherd. And we know it. You know it because Jesus then goes on to say, the good shepherd, the shepherd is the one who lays down his life for the sheep, and the shepherd would. A little later on, David describes, right, a rod and staff, weapons that a shepherd would use to defend the herd, to defend the sheep. Right? And we go, hey, like your rod and staff, they comfort me. And you're like, great, I can picture this like perfect little like staff of Jesus. You go, no, weapons. Meant to fend off any predator that would come and try to steal from the herd. What are the things that are trying to steal life from you? My cousin called me one day. He said, hey, I've got a wolf problem. I said, oh yeah, that's different. And he said, yeah, like the wolves, they get into my chicken coop. And they don't just take one chicken, they destroy the whole thing. Or they get in, and it's not like they just take a one chicken. And they're like, we'll leave you the rest, we just need a meal. No, they're like, we'll eat one and kill the rest. That's how they roll. And I think there are those things. You say, hey, if you let them get into your life, they destroy. We're working toward Easter. Excuse me, we're using this question as we've been working toward Easter that Jesus puts to his followers in the Gospel of Matthew. And it's the question that each of us needs to answer. Like, who do you say that I am? Who do the disciples say? Who do you say that Jesus is? And if you read a little further in Matthew, Simon actually answers the question this way. So Simon Peter answered Jesus. He says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, hey, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And then he says this, the gates of Hades will never overcome it. And I think what I want you to hear is this, it's in the naming of Jesus as Messiah. It's in the naming of Jesus as Lord, as Son of the living God, that the church is birthed. Jesus says, listen, on this rock, and there's different, you go different interpretations of this, rock, Petros, Peter, play on words, but I think, listen, it is a declaration of faith and trust in Jesus as Messiah, and Jesus says, hey, on this declaration that you have made, Peter, I am going to build my church, and not even the gates of hell will overcome it. Jesus says, hey, I'm going to build my people. I'm going to build my movement. I'm going to build my gathering, literally gathering of followers. And not even the gates of hell are going to be able to overcome it. Who we say Jesus is matters. Who you say Jesus is matters. If you name him as Good Shepherd, it means naming him as source of life and also committing to the implication of following in his way. The way of Jesus, not the way of others. Later on in the Gospel of Matthew, and this is chapter 18, Jesus tells a parable, again about a shepherd and his sheep. And he says this, he says, what do you think? I like parables that start that. Hey, what do you think about this? What he says, hey, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hill and go look for the one that has wandered off? The question mark. And I got to go, like, what are the disciples thinking in that moment? Like, okay, if, like, did you leave a pregnant pause after that, Jesus? Because we just keep reading. But did you leave room for answers? But he says, hey, is he not going to leave the 99? Is he not going to go look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, whenever Jesus says truly, especially if he says truly, truly, you go, okay, pay very close attention to what he's about to say. He is happier about that one sheep. He's happier that one sheep was found than the 99 who did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any one of these little children, any one of these should perish. You see, I think all throughout Scripture we see it's the heart of God for the world. This is the heart of God for the world, that not one should perish. In Luke 19, Jesus says, the Son of Man came to seek and save, in that order, the lost. And this is why we've begun to express our mission as a church in these same words. We exist to see people become fully alive followers of Jesus. We exist to see people become fully alive. And part of that is you becoming fully alive to a fuller degree, okay? You can kind of figure out which fuller and fully. Fuller alive until you are fully alive. Like, this is the hope for every single one of you as followers of Jesus. That is an important part of it. But it can't end there. We exist to see others, people far from God, become fully alive followers of Jesus. And we do it by becoming a church who works to embrace those who are far from God. How do you embrace the outsider? How do you work to reach, to cultivate relationship? How do we serve? How do we go from this place? Tom Rainer, who studies church growth and also church death, he writes this. He says, thriving churches have the Great Commission as the centerpiece of their vision, while dying churches have forgotten the clear command of Christ. And it's the command of Christ who says, I am the good shepherd, the one who lays down his life. Christ who says, I've come so that they may have life and have it abundantly, have it to the full. It's Christ who says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've come not to call the righteous, but to call sinners. And it's Christ who says, listen, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99. It's Christ who says, come follow me, learn from me, watch how I do it, learn these unforced rhythms of grace. And then it's Christ who says, go and make disciples of all nations, baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. Teach them the way of Jesus, to live in and to follow the way of Jesus. And then he says, and this is this great promise, and he says, and behold, I am with you always. There's a prayer, we're going to end here, that Jesus prays in the Gospel of John. He says, he prays for his disciples. And then in praying for his disciples, he prays for all who would come after. He prayed for you and for me and for every single one who will come after. And I go, 168 years. 168 years of God being faithful and of people responding. And I go, what would it look like in 168 years from now for people to look back and go, man, I'm sure glad that they were faithful.